We're going to continue on with our study of the book of Ruth, and we're getting a little over halfway through chapter 2. Probably will be finishing the book in the next 3 to 4 weeks probably, and we'll move into the book of Job at that point. And Job will be a little bit different. We won't do necessarily a verse-by-verse breakdown of the book, but we will be looking at it in sections and pointing out various sections because of the arguments and the responses of the three friends that are made to Job, and then Job's responses, and we'll be pointing up things there. So it'll be a little different type of study, but it will be Job will be a good study. It'll be a very good study. All right, in continuing looking at the book of Ruth, and let me just go ahead and announce, by the way, my wife is officially retired. Now, her official last day was Friday, and so she's been laying around enjoying that ever since.
Now you got to put up family even more.
So every day is Saturday for her now. So she's glad for that. So as we look at Ruth, beginning to read in chapter 2, verse 17, New International Version. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." So this whole section, and really moving all the way down into verse 23, is just, almost electric with the excitement as you read this passage. And it seems that Boaz's servants had followed his command to a fault. You remember, he had told his workers just a little bit earlier in verse 16, he told his workers, he said, pull out some of the stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. And it seems that they followed his command right to the point. And you can imagine Ruth gathering all that she can carry through the day, seeing the large amount, and then she threshed it out and realizing that she really had a bounty from this. Commentators note that an ephah was close to 3/5 of a bushel of grain, about 22 to 36 liters, and it would have weighed between 30 and 50 pounds. And this much grain would have lasted Ruth and Naomi probably several weeks. So this is one day's work. She had gleaned in the fields, had received things that had been left on purpose for her, and now she had between 30 and 50 pounds of grain after one day of laboring in the field, which would have lasted her and Ruth for almost a month. And, just an unreal bounty for that day. Now, we don't know how far Ruth would have had to carry this prized weight. But if you're carrying between 30 and 50 pounds, you really don't have to carry it too far to really kind of be wore out. But she carried it back to town. She carried it back to wherever she was staying with Naomi. So it was evidently some distance. And you can imagine that by the time she got there, she probably was kind of struggling with all this. And she arrives and she shows Naomi, the bounty that she had received. Plus, depending upon which translation you use, she had a doggy bag left over from lunch at Boaz's home, or wherever he had his meal, and she gave her the remainder of that. And verse 19 gives to us Naomi's really surprise and almost disbelief at what had happened. And she utters just a flood of statements. And, she says, where did you glean today? Where did you work? And then it's almost like, well, who cares? Blessed be the man who did this for you. This is great. And it seemed like that Naomi, as I read and studied this passage, had what we often call a V8 moment. Now, you've seen the V8 commercials when on the side ahead, you could have done this. And it seemed like this is what Naomi was having. You remember, all the way through chapter 1, Naomi is poor, pitiful me. God's against me. He don't like me. He's never, I left full and he sent me back empty, and the Lord has made my life bitter, and he's done all of this and he's done all of that to me, and I just don't have any hope, any future. She told the two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, you might as well go back to your gods and go back to your people, because I ain't got nothing for you. And it seemed like all of that was just shoved right back into her face with an, oh really, from God. She had complained, thought her life was done, just poverty-stricken. And here comes Ruth, struggling back home with nearly 50 pounds of grain that's going to last them nearly a month, and that's just one day that she had got. And the Lord said, you remember how you was complaining about how I'm not taking care of you? And the Lord wasn't even finished yet, because Ruth goes on to tell Naomi that the field that she worked in was owned by a man named Boaz. So the setting of the whole passage is really, one of in which you can almost see the Lord sitting and say, okay, hey y'all, you've heard all that Naomi had to say. Watch this. I've got a providence. I've got something already in place. And she's going to learn that I've been here all the time. And as we go on through the passage, Naomi's first response, the Lord bless him, is quickly followed by another V8 moment, or just a boing. Because look at what she says in verse 20. He, and this is not Boaz that she's referring to. He, God, has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and to the dead. And the reason she states this is because she just all of a sudden was faced with the realization that Boaz is a close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. And so she's, in these couple of verses, it's almost like the Lord is saying, look, this is how you have talked about me, how you have felt that I've not been there, and I've done all of this to you as a wrong, but look at the blessing that I am giving to you now. Now, one of the things about this passage that kind of is interesting is that evidently, obviously, Naomi understood the value of a kinsman redeemer. Now, the kinsman redeemer is an interesting concept in the Old Testament. There's a couple of words, but generally the Hebrew word is goel. And you've probably heard this preached from and talked about before. And the root of this word, goel, which ends up with being kinsman redeemer, is that it really refers to a buying back or to redeem. And through this provision of the Old Testament law, Boaz could fulfill the duty of preserving the name of the dead. In this sense, Mahlon, who was Ruth's husband, by marrying Ruth. That was a law in the Old Testament. And this is, you'll see it referred to as the Levirate law. And it's not because you find it in the book of Leviticus. which is what I thought for a long time, but no, that's not it. The very law actually refers to this idea of the kinsman redeemer, the buying back by relatives of a deceased person. And there are several interesting things about this kinsman redeemer in the Old Testament. The responsibilities of a goel, or kinsman redeemer, included these things: avenging the death of a murdered relative, Numbers chapter 35, verse 19, kind of a vigilante type situation, set up by law, but also marrying a childless widow of a deceased brother, which is coming pretty close to what Mahlon and Ruth and then Boaz, although Boaz wasn't a brother, he was, we don't know, cousin, uncle, something. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 10, talks about the marrying the widow of a deceased brother. The goel could also buy back family land that had been sold. This is found in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 25. Also, he could buy a family member who had been sold as a slave. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 47 through 49. And we talked about that passage when we went through the Old Testament and slavery some months ago. And the goel could look after a needy and helpless member of a family, of his related family. Leviticus 25, verse 35. So that's kind of the power of a kinsman redeemer. A provision that God set up in the law of the Old Testament to care for people who had faced, a discouraging, disabling, poverty-making situation. It was a. We would use the term welfare. We would use the term charity case. But these were people who had entered into difficulties in life, and now there was a setup so that a relative could step up and provide for that family member. Now, it's interesting that this is the first time we've heard about this. Naomi evidently knew about it. She understood it because this popped right into her mind. And you wonder, why didn't she talk about this to Ruth and to Orpah back in chapter 1 when she said, I don't have anything for you? Just totally forgot about that or didn't say anything about it. And you also wonder, why didn't she say something about this when Ruth got ready to leave in chapter 2, verse 1, and she said, I'm going to go see if I can find somebody's field to work in. You would have thought maybe, well, find a kinsman redeemer. Find a relative. But Naomi didn't say a word about that there either. Why do you think that?
She still had a pity for it.
Okay. She was still having a pity party. Yeah. Any other reason? Why do you think, if this guy in his position is so important to the life of a family that is facing destitution, and she obviously knew about it, why didn't she say something about it before now? Pity party is a pretty good idea on that. What else?
Discouragement, man.
She was discouraged. But remember, she was really discouraged back in chapter 1. Don't even call me Naomi, call me Mara, I'm bitter. God don't love me, nobody likes me, now I got to go home and eat worms, that whole, thing. Any other reason? Why else do you think she may not have, offered this? As it was evidently pretty important.
Well, could it have been that he was a relative of her husband, and maybe she just didn't think about it before, or thought that he wouldn't help because it was her husband's relative?
She didn't think it was an option. Because, once again, they left Bethlehem, went to the land of Moab for 10 years, left all the family. Now she's going to come back, and now I'm going to ask family to take care of me. You know, any number of all of these are very legitimate reasons why she may not have, said anything about it. But how often is it that we use the same thing in thinking about our situation? I don't know why God has done this to me. I've been such a good little boy and girl. I don't know why God is being mean to me. Or discouraged. I've had so much to happen. And it looks like God's against me. Maybe, I know about His promise, but He hasn't done anything else for me, so why should He do this? Discouraged. Or I've burnt my bridges. We've used some of these same things in our life to reinforce our failure to trust God. Talk to me about that. Agree, disagree? I hear the crickets. A lot of silence out there.
Well, I know somebody that does have that attitude, and it's really hard to talk to them and try to get. But it's sort of like she says, everybody's so mean to me, and God's never done anything, so God doesn't care any more about me than other people do.
Yeah, I've looked in the mirror and seen somebody that had that attitude before.
I was telling Angela about this, my friend at work, her son's 36 years old, and he walked out on the deck the other weekend, a summer morning. So she was going to take him to urgent care. Urgent care was closed. She called 911, so the first responders came. They dropped the EpiPen, the oxygen thing wouldn't work, and they dropped him. Finally, the EMS got him, got him to the hospital, in with him, died. 36, has a newborn baby, and a 2-year-old. So I'm thinking, they have every reason to say, wow, it was such a freak accident. But, they're doing well.
And the thing about all of that, in that particular case and our situation is that, things do happen. Life happens. And sometimes life sucks. I think this lady that she's just referring to would probably say at this point, this just really sucks. You know what I'm saying?
No, he was stung when he was a little boy, but he took him to the doctor, and by the time they got there, he was fine. So he did not.
Yeah, because it don't have to be, it could be in the cold, never been or anything, fire, bit hurt, what hurt, what caused it.
And this guy,
Stung and it affected her, and she went through all.
7 years of shots.
Yeah.
this guy was stung by a queen point, which they said had a, some women are like that. They just carry a lot more poison than others. You know what I'm saying? How you like that, guys? Yeah. See how I work that thing in? How you like that?
I just hope you get some supper.
Well, I've cooked it, so it's no.
I thought that, but I didn't say it.
Yes, see? I know you wanted me to work that in, and so I did. But yeah, and that's what they said. The queen carries a lot more venom, and he said he was a big guy. Said I don't have.
It could have been his time to go.
Yeah.
Just think about it. A queen
There you go.
EpiPen fell, whatever. I mean, the circumstances were just in
Yeah.
place. He was probably just meant to go.
Yeah.
Or you had 2 years trying to take care of it.
Well, the equipment.
And you think about it, the Bible tells us
It's still.
very clearly that it is appointed unto man once to die.
Yeah, normally.
It never explains when, where, or how. It just says it's going to happen. And when you see something like that, one of the natural things is that it really must have been his time to go, because all of that seemed to work together. But we use those things. We look at all of this on the outside, and we come down here, we look at our situation, and we fail to trust and remember the promises that God had already set in place for us. It is so easy for us to be a Naomi and look at all that's happening and then discredit and discard all the promises that God has given us that are in place that He hasn't forgotten. Here's a perfect example right here. Naomi thinking it's all over. All of a sudden, I got 50 pounds worth of grain that I'm going to be able to live on, and a kinsman redeemer. Jesus said it this way. Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. I think it was one of the instances on the boat. He had a couple of those on the lake. And he asked his disciples, "Why are you afraid? You have such little faith." And that is so us. Something happened. Well, God just don't love me no more, and His word is just not like what He said. He just,
On the other side of the coin, when something bad, when something bad happens, nationally, all the public flocks to the church.
Mhm.
That's the other side
Yeah,
of the coin.
yeah, yeah. They look for God then. And we fail otherwise to remember just His promises are real. And it took someone stepping up, Ruth stepping up, telling Naomi, "I'm going to go try to find her something to eat." And Naomi said, "Well, go ahead. I ain't going with you." Remember that back in chapter 2.
Bring me something back.
Bring me some back when you come,
Real nice.
It took someone stepping up to get into God's flow of providence to bring this discouraged believer, Naomi, to the truth and hope of God. And sometimes we're made to wonder, why does God lead us and work with us in certain ways? Why has God led me down this road? Why has God done it like this? Couldn't He have done it a different way? It could well be in some of those cases that God does that to show us or to show to others the beauty of His grace, His providence, and His truth. And He has to use us to help that person. Ruth was the one who helped Naomi get the point. Remember, Ruth is a Moabitess. She came from a heathen country. She came where they burnt their children in sacrifice. And now she's having to teach a born and bred Israelite the truth of God. Sometimes the Lord will use us to help people who ought to know better, to realize His truth. But sometimes it takes us down pathways and roads that we wonder, why are you doing this to me? And we forget, we fail to trust that God knows what He's doing. He will honor His word. He hasn't forgot you. That is so hard for us. Hold up a mirror and I'm talking to me. But it is so hard for us to do that sometimes. And we often, in the middle of all this, simply don't stop long enough to realize how God is using us and how God is with us. We look at the immediate circumstance And it's like, we can't see any further than the end of our nose. We see the immediate circumstance and forget about the whole situation of the mercy and the working of God. I mean, the book of Ruth is just full of day-by-day stuff for our life. And at Naomi's statement, when she said to Ruth, he's one of our kinsman redeemers, it seemed like almost that Ruth almost broke in and interrupted her. In verse 21, then Ruth the Moabitess said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. In other words, I got 30 to 50 pounds of grain today. He told me to stay with them all the way through harvest. This might be a result every day. So they could easily have enough food to last until the next harvest. Looking at just the immediate situation. And it seems that it's dawning on Ruth as well that what she got today might become a steady income over the next couple of months. And Naomi, as we continue to read verse 22, Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Naomi kind of calms down a little bit here, and she gives her daughter-in-law some counsel. She tells Ruth that Boaz's offer is good, and that she should take him up on it and stay with his servant girls in the field, because of the risk of attack in other fields. Now we have to remember, with her saying that this is the time of the judges. And remember, one of the key phrases about the book of Judges is that every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And when you live in a society that has that, safety is always something that has to be considered. We're getting pretty close to that, in our own day, if we're not there in our own day. So Ruth took this counsel and she stayed and probably worked another 6 or 7 weeks. That would have been about the length of the harvest. And it carried her, she started right about the time of Passover. She ended up right around the time of the Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of Pentecost. And she gleaned every day. So we don't know how much she got every day, whether she got the same 30 to 50 pounds, but she probably got way more than she would have gotten just otherwise in another field. And she was safe, and she continued to be within sight, at least, of Boaz. But it's interesting that, we're not told of any other contact or any other conversation between either Boaz and Ruth, or Naomi and Boaz, for that matter. And it seemed, so very promising just a couple of verses before, and now it seems to be, just drifted away to nothing. But providence, the providence of God is like that. Most of the providence of God's work is done slowly, quietly. That's why it's called the hidden hand of God. Because the providence of God is working the little details of life to bring a situation to a point to where His will is accomplished in our life. So, Ruth continued, for all we know, for the next 6 or 7 weeks. Verse 23, that's all it gives us. But she continued to work. Once again, we talked last week, she was doing the sweat equity. Why didn't Boaz just give her the field? No. Why didn't he just tell her, don't worry about it, I'll bring it by the house? No, he wanted her to work. And she continued to work hard for that 6 or 7 weeks. She continued to be consistent in being who she was. And one of the things, when we're facing situations in which, it all looks like things are at a standstill. We've run up against a wall almost, and it's just there. What do we do? Well, the best thing is to stand still and stay consistent with who you are in Christ. And by standing still, in other words, she didn't try to be stupid, go off in some other field or whatever. She stayed, she worked, she continued to be the person that she was that brought her to the notice of Boaz to begin with. And I think that's an important lesson for us, is that, continue to be who you are. If it doesn't look like anything big is happening, it doesn't mean you've got to go change something, but rather continue to be who you are in Jesus Christ. Continue to stay consistent, because He notices. And His providence is working. We may not be able to see it or feel it, but with that, how much she carried home every day was still a little whisper in her ear. Keep going, Ruth. Keep going. I got this. I know Boaz hadn't talked to you since, but I got this. Keep being who you are. And that's another thing for us, that sometimes it's such a challenge. Stay consistent. Stay faithful. Stay who you are in Jesus Christ. Because sometimes we want to, we get to a place where we feel like, well, I've got to help God out. And that's what happens in chapter 3. Let's look at this, chapter 3. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well cared for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, perfume yourself, get on your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. Now when he lies down, you know the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. This is an interesting passage. As we go into this third chapter, and we have to remind ourselves, they've only been back a couple of months. 3-4 months. From chapter 1 to chapter 3, there's only been, a quarter of a year. 4 months at the most, probably. And it's easy for us to automatically think that they've been there for a long time. But really, looking at the time frame, only about 4 months. And this relationship between Ruth and Boaz was still pretty fresh at that point. And it's easy for us to wonder, well, why didn't Boaz jump at the opportunity that was before him? And one commentator notes that perhaps Boaz was being sensitive toward Ruth as a widow, not wishing to impose himself upon her until she was emotionally healed and ready to contemplate marriage. She would have come back wearing the clothing of widowhood. And it wouldn't have been until she took those clothes off and put on the regular day-by-day stuff that she would have been saying, okay, I'm ready to, I'm past this, I'm ready to get married again. And so Boaz could have, we're not told, so we're just kind of speculating, but it could well have been that Boaz was just simply respecting her space, as, because it's only been a couple of months. But for whatever reason, Boaz wasn't moving fast enough for Naomi, who one day, verse 1, decides that time and chance are slipping away and she must force the issue. And her thinking about this creates several decision crises for both Ruth and Boaz. And the first crisis is, get my eraser out here so I can give myself some space. That looks pretty good there, don't it?
Black soaks out there.
Yeah, well,
So what was Naomi doing while Ruth was out working? Was she sitting at home on the couch watching football and eating bonbons?
Probably. You know, that's how people do when they get retired and stuff like that, you know. They just kind of, you know, when they don't.
Obviously, you haven't retired yet.
No, obviously I have not. Yeah, no. My wife has, though. She has retired. She's still alive. Just saying. So, yeah, Naomi evidently was eating grain and, you know, making bread and saying, you go, girl, work. You know,
She had time to plot.
she had time to plot. And over that 3 or 4 months, she got to the place of thinking, things ain't happening here. And my daughter-in-law ain't getting any younger. I need to get her hooked up pretty quick with some guy. And by that, she creates a couple of crises. The first crisis that happens is the crisis of waiting. Now, how many of you are very patient people? Barbara, Butch, is that true?
I was waiting on you to say something.
Okay. And of course, I noticed, I looked back and Barbara had her hand. She didn't have her hand. She had her, you know, she just.
She was being patient.
She was being patient. Yeah, few of us are blessed with patience. And if Naomi had heard of the patience of Job, because Job had happened sometime in the past before that, she evidently hadn't learned the lesson that Job learned. And of course, we've not fared much better. Balancing, waiting on the Lord, stepping up to get into God's providence, and not stepping over the line to get into a mess can be a difficult challenge. Trying to balance those three. It's not an easy balance. Waiting creates a crisis of decision for us. Now, when we think about waiting, some of the natural things that come up is, okay, how long is enough? You know, it's kind of like, you know, if anybody wants to ever make you feel guilty when they're preaching, they can talk about reading the Bible and praying and witnessing. How much reading is enough? How much praying is enough? How much witnessing is enough? I mean, you know, you can always get somebody guilty by talking about one of those three things. So how long is long enough to wait? And if I'm waiting, what does, you know, good waiting look like? You know, I just sat around twiddling my fingers. What is this supposed to look like? And when we get ready to act, what is too far? In other words, I've got to do something, but stepping up and stepping over or stepping in it, you know what I mean? Yeah. Where's the boundary line for those things? And these three questions can haunt our minds in facing some situations. And it's the tension between those three. How long? What does? What's too far? It's that balancing, that tension between the three of those that creates a situation where we are tempted to take matters into our own hands. One day, it just kind of, all right, I've had enough of this. I'm going to do something about it. And we plan to then help the Lord. So, looking at the time here. So, what do you think was pressing on Naomi to take matters into her own hands? She tells us here in the passage. What do you think that is? Why did she feel like she couldn't wait any longer?
Billy, I'm still confused about the waiting. I mean, maybe she was there and just, you know, how do you know what to do? Okay. So maybe waiting should have been, they should have just both sat at the house, put a sign on the door, waiting for a kinsman redeemer, and hung out. You know,
or should they both have worked, or should, that is the hard part of life, of figuring out what does that wedding look like?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, how long should she have waited? Would he have ever noticed her in the fields beyond just leaving grain behind? That's the question.
Yeah, it is, and that's why these three questions here are really important to us when we think about, waiting on the Lord. Okay, how long am I supposed to wait on Him? And what am I supposed to do while I'm waiting? And if I do something, what's too far? And I'm going to mess up. That is the challenge for us. And Naomi was urged, if you will, from one, she had a sense of duty. Look what she said. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well cared for?" She felt like it was her duty as a mother-in-law to find her daughter-in-law a husband. And this could have been also exacerbated, and I've noted this, that, she may have had a little fear. I've been here 3-4 months. Nobody's stepping up. Boaz noticed her, and he really started off pretty good, but he just kind of floated off somewhere, Men are like that. You just can't trust them, And she's not getting any younger, and she is exposing herself to become a victim. Particularly in Israel, in that day, because of the blessings that God had talked about in regards to family, if a woman didn't have a family, it was looked at as a reproach. What's wrong with you? That nobody wants you. There's something wrong with you. And she would have been opening herself up to become victimized by society that was around her. So, and maybe here's a big one for Naomi, that after all that happened in chapter 2, she may have begun to really realize that God was on the scene. And that He is providing a way. So I just need to help Him.
But she also may have seen, hey, this is a jewel here, man. This guy's got power, money.
He's got a little do-re-mi.
He's a little sucker. So,
Yeah. He ain't never been hitched up either, so.
There you go.
Yeah, if I got a plan for you, son,
Yeah, let me weave this web in there.
Uh-huh.
She'd been working all day. She'd been working all day, all harvest long. Now the harvest's over, so she's gonna be sitting around the house with Naomi cramping her style, eating her bonbon.
Yeah, hey,
Maybe
Naomi may be thinking,
She's nerve-wracking.
I got to look after myself here. That could have been what she's looking at too.
So how do we know God wasn't prompting her?
But she was lazy,
All that.
You gotta be able to listen to God too. He can be prompted without you listening.
Yeah, and I think she was seeing. I think the fact that she was beginning to realize that God was on the scene. Because chapter 1, God ain't nowhere to be found. Chapter 2, He's found me Boaz. And I got groceries.
How old is Boaz? How old is Boaz?
Oh, I don't know, but I would probably figure, based upon what he said later on down in the passage, Boaz was at least probably a good 10 years older than her. Maybe older. Maybe 15 years. Yeah. And the Hebrew for that is interesting. We're going to get into that because this scheme that Naomi came up with is, as you read it, you just wonder, what are you thinking? This is ludicrous. And as we often say, you can't fix stupid. And that's one of the things that come to my mind as I read Naomi's scheme to help God. We don't have time to get into it, but this is going to be fun looking at this. Because you're thinking, God, if you don't come on the scene, this is going to be a dull mess. You know what I'm saying? Because of what she was plotting out. We'll talk about that next week.